Hi, you're watching Hexus TV and we're here at the Museum of Computing here in Swindon, and I'm talking to Jeremy Holt, who is the chairman and founder of the museum. Hi Jeremy.
Hello.
Could you tell us a little bit about why you started the museum and why you got involved?
Certainly. My original idea for the museum went back to 1990, right. And I suggested it to a friend called Simon Webb, who is the current curator of the museum.
Okay.
And together we got more than half the local computer companies to support us. But the big problem was premises. And it was a long slog for 13 years before we got premises in 2003.
Okay, and where was that?
The premises there then were in the University of Bath campus in Swindon, which was in Oakfield. We were there for 5 years, but then when the University of Bath moved out of Swindon, we couldn't stay there. So for the last 12 months, all of the 7,000 exhibits that we've got have been in storage.
Right, okay. And the museum's reopening now in a new location,
right.
We're there now.
Yeah.
So how did you come across this place here?
Okay, well, one of the things that we did in the 5 years that we were open is that we always kept our nose clean, we didn't cause any trouble for anyone else. And I think that was recognised that we were a safe pair of hands.
Okay.
And one of the councillors in Swindon Borough Council suggested to us that this might be a good location for the museum,
right.
Because it's close to the library, it's close to the theatre, and then there's an enormous footfall outside. When we were shown it, we were sold on it straight away because it was exactly what we wanted to have.
Okay. So what's your history with computing and why did you want to create this place?
Okay, good question. I'm a solicitor who specialises in computer law. I've written a rather dull book on computer law that my 2 teenage daughters tell me is worth more on eBay unsigned than signed. And some years ago, I thought that there really needed to be a museum to represent the history of computing in this country.
Yeah.
We have quite a glorious history of computing. Many, many years ago, my father, who was in the Royal Navy, helped set up the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Yeovilton. I felt in some ways that he'd helped set that up. What I would do would be to find some way of recognising the contribution that this country had made to the history of computing. And I also felt that a number of youngsters didn't really understand quite how primitive things were only a few years ago.
Right, okay. So who else is involved in this project?
We have a band of 30 very gallant volunteers.
Right.
As always with a voluntary organisation, the various people who come and get involved bring their own skills. One person deals with the software, one person deals with the hardware, one person deals with the curatorial side, the curator, one person deals with the newsletter, one person does the public relations, I deal with the legal and accounting side, and lots of other volunteers come forward. And it's very powerful. You don't have much money, but with a good band of supporters, there's a lot you can do. We also have a database of about 500 supporters that we contact from time to time when big things are happening.
Okay, so you've got a few thousand pieces from the history of computing,
yeah.
A handful of which really you've got on show for the launch party. Where did all these things come from and how did you get them?
Well, ironically, whenever I mentioned the museum, the idea of a museum to people, people always talked about where you could get exhibits from. Of all the different problems that we had, that was the least of our problems. We have got the 7,000 exhibits that we have practically for free. They've virtually all been given to us. And sometimes, where we used to be, it was like a Victorian orphanage. People would just leave bits for us outside, and we'd never know where they came from. So we couldn't write them a thank you letter, which was a bit upsetting, because we would have liked them to have thanked the people who gave things. People have been enormously generous, particularly when they know it's going to an organisation that's not a profit-making organisation. Yeah. They think we're a safe pair of hands. Quite a lot of widows have contacted us where their husband who's died has had a big cellar full of computers, and we've been allowed to choose some of the best exhibits from there.
Okay. So, in the history of computing, as you've seen it, what would you say is the most interesting piece?
I suppose the piece, it is not a particularly amazing piece of kit, but the first computer I had was a Spectrum 2. And I can remember rigging up the wires, rigging it up to the television set, and suddenly the thing worked. And it was just magic. You know, I'd read about computers, and you know, earlier on, computers had been huge machines in air-conditioned basements manned by men in white coats. This was the first home computer I ever had, and when it started working and we played this incredibly dull game on it, I thought, this is great. This is computing being handed out to the masses. They've got control about what's going on. So I suppose it's the rather dull Spectrum 2, And for any geeks listening, yes, it was the one with the rubber keys.
Okay, so you're here in Swindon near the Wyvern Theatre. To anyone who might think about coming down and having a look, what would you say to them?
Well, we'll be open from the beginning of August. Just come and have a look. We're going to have a great shop here as a money-making venture at the front of the museum, so we'll be selling all kinds of computer-related stuff. I've never come across anybody who's looked around the museum who hasn't been fascinated by what's been there. I have suggested to the rest of the committee that we write on the wall of the museum in 2-foot-high letters, "I used to have one of those," because that is what everybody says when they come in. They look around and they suddenly discover a computer that they had in the past and they say, "I used to have one of those." So I think that should be the motto of the museum.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Okay.
Steve Kerrison here with Jeremy Holt at the Swindon Museum of Computing. Thank you for watching.